I can see the countdown. That marks the exact moment someone decides to leave their partner. The day the numbers above my father's head hit 0. He laid a set of divorce papers on the kitchen island and walked out on my mother and me, without looking back. The day my best friend Rachel's clock hit 0. She finally found the courage to pack her bags and leave her toxic ex. My greatest fear in life was seeing those numbers appear above Dan's head. But for 7 years of marriage, his crown was clean, not a single digit, nothing. I spent those 7 years believing I was the luckiest woman alive. I had married a truly good man until last month, when he came to pick me up from work. I looked up as I got into the passenger seat, and a bleeding crimson timer sliced through the dim evening. 702 days, 14 hours, 22 minutes, less than 2 years. My chest tightened, a cold panic seizing my lungs. I started looking for answers. Had I done something wrong? Had his heart wandered? And then came the storm. We were parked outside his office building when we ran into his new intern Lexi. She was drenched to the bone, but her smile was brilliant, radiant against the gray afternoon. Dan handed her a napkin, face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. But in that exact microsecond, the numbers above his head flickered and plummeted. 327 days, 4 hours, 47 minutes. A drop of over 300 days. The roar of the rain was deafening, but in that silence, I knew I had found my answer. One Dan. Nancy. I am so sorry. The weather is insane, and I couldn't get an Uber to save my life. The car door flew open. A gust of wet wind whipped into the cabin, spraying the leather seats. Lexi shook her umbrella and slid into the back seat, bringing a wave of damp, humid air with her. Her white chiffon blouse clung to her skin, and her dark hair dripped onto her shoulders. She looks like a drowned rat, yet she was glowing. Dan's hands remained on the steering wheel. He didn't turn around. He simply reached into the center console, pulled out a handful of tissues and stretched his arm over my shoulder, offering them to the back. Dry off, he said, his voice carrying that warm, familiar kindness. You'll catch a cold. Lexi took them, her fingers deliberately brushing his knuckles. She didn't flinch. Thanks, Dan. I knew you always looked out for us poor struggling interns. She giggled, entirely devoid of the difference usually reserved for a CEO. Dan pulled his hand back, thumb lightly tracing the leather of the steering wheel. It's not easy for a young girl running sales calls in the city. I sat in the passenger seat staring at the windshield. The wiper slammed back and forth, dragging heavy sheets of water across the glass. And right when Dan uttered that soft, empathetic phrase, not easy, the red numbers above his head shifted again. The crimson light flashed, dropping from 327 days, 4 hours, 47 minutes to 289 days, 10 hours, 12 minutes. Just like that, a month of our remaining marriage evaporated, because of a single puff of cheap empathy. I closed my eyes, a dull ache blooming in my stomach. Is the AC too high? Dan asked. Suddenly, I opened my eyes, thinking he was speaking to me. I was about to say I was fine when a sneeze echoed from the back seat. A little, Lexi said, her voice shivering. My clothes are soaked. The air vent is blowing right on me. Dan looked down at the console, turning the temperature dial up 3 degrees, and his eyes fell on the cashmere throw draped over my lap. It was a blanket I'd kept in the car for chilly evenings. Nancy, he said softly, give Lexi the blanket. She's shivering. I turned my head to look at him. The cabin was dim, the passing street lights casting sharp shadows across his handsome profile. His expression was completely open, free of guilt. It was the face of a man performing a simple act of charity. This was Dan, a perfect husband in everyone's eyes until attentive, radiating a suffocating sense of decency. Without a word, I lifted the blanket and passed it back. Oh, thanks, Nancy. Lexi wrapped herself in it. You're so sweet. Dan is incredibly lucky to have you. She sniffed, letting out a satisfied sigh. I looked up at his head. 260 days. 5 hours, 8 minutes. Another 29 days gone. The car lapsed into silence, save for the hum of the tires against the wet asphalt. Up ahead we approached an intersection. A left turn LED to the French bistro I had booked 2 weeks ago for our anniversary. Straight ahead lay the rundown warehouse district on the edge of town, where Lexi rented an apartment. Dan flicked the turn signal straight. I watched the flashing green arrow on the dashboard. Aren't we going to dinner? My voice was quiet, almost lost to the storm. Dan pressed the brakes and offered a fleeting apologetic look. This storm is too bad, Nancy. Her neighborhood isn't safe for a girl to walk alone at night, especially drenched like this. Let's drop her off first. We can do dinner afterward. They only hold our table until 8. I said. It's already 7:30. Dan's brow furrowed. Nancy, she's my employee. I can't leave her stranded in a deluge. It's just a dinner. If we miss it, I'll take you out tomorrow to make up for it. He spoke with such absolute righteousness in his mind. His actions were rooted in pure benevolence. Therefore, any objection on my part was merely a childish tantrum. From the back, Lexi leaned her head forward. Dan, honestly, you can just drop me at the subway station. I don't want to get in the way of your anniversary. Her tone was dripping with sincerity, but we both knew there wasn't a subway station for miles. Dan's frown deepened. Don't be ridiculous. You're not navigating the subway in this weather. The light turned green. Dan stepped on the gas. The car surged straight through the intersection, leaving the quiet romance of the French restaurant behind us. The numbers flickered, 201 days. 2 hours, 30 minutes. Thanks, Dan. Lexi murmured. 2. It was past 8:30. By the time we dropped her off, the rain had only intensified, turning into a relentless downpour. Dan parked in our apartment's underground garage and cut the engine. He unbuckled his seatbelt and reached over to unclip mine. I'm sorry, Nancy. His hand brushed against my collarbone, his skin radiating warmth. Tomorrow I'll cancel all my meetings. I'll take you back to that restaurant, okay? I stared at him. After 7 years of marriage, his face was still the most familiar thing in my world. Still handsome, soft, but the glowing red numbers above him were blinding. 198 days, 11 hours, 45 minutes. I unbuckled myself and opened the car door. It's fine. I'm tired. I just want to go upstairs. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. When I stepped out of the shower, my head felt heavy and my throat burned. The cold draft in the car had caught up with me. Dan walked out of the kitchen carrying a glass of warm water. Seeing my pale face, he immediately came over and pressed the back of his hand to my forehead. You're burning up, he said, his brows knitting together. Did you catch a cold in the car? He guided me to the sofa. His touch as gentle as if I were made of glass. He fetched the medicine box, pulled out fever reducers, and went back to the kitchen to brew some lemon ginger tea. Take this first. He placed the pills in my hand and watched me swallow them. I'll make you some hot soup. Go lie down in bed. I leaned back against the pillows, listening to the familiar sounds drifting from the kitchen. The rhythmic chop of ginger, the clink of metal, the soft boil of water. This was the man I married. He had never raised his voice, never mistreated me, never withheld affection. He the husband who would fuss over me when I was sick, who would show up with an umbrella in a storm. He was flawless. And that was exactly how I had allowed myself to be slowly anesthetized by 7 years of quiet domestic bliss. Until the clock appeared. Dan walked into the bedroom, carefully placing a mug of steaming tea on the nightstand. Let it cool down a bit before you drink it. He sat on the edge of the mattress and took my hand. Are you still mad at me? He smiled, gently rubbing my knuckles. I promise you, I just felt sorry for her. She's young and struggling. You're the only one in my heart. I looked at him. Was I? I looked at the numbers, 198 days, 10 hours, 20 minutes. Timer hadn't budged. His guilt, his tenderness, his soft promises. None of it bought us even a single extra second. I closed my eyes and quietly pulled my hand from his grasp. I'm not mad. Right then his phone rang, shattering the quiet of the bedroom. Dan hesitated, picking up the device from the nightstand. The screen lit up with Lexi's name. He glanced at me, his eyes shifting slightly. Instead of declining, I pressed answer and put it on speaker. It was his favorite way of proving he had nothing to hide. Dan, Lexi's voice came through, trembling and thick with tears. What's wrong? Dan's voice tightened instantly. My roommate locked me out. She sobbed, the sound of heavy rain roaring in her background. I was in the shower and realized I forgot a towel. I stepped out into the hallway, wrapped in one and draft slammed the door shut. My keys and phone are inside. I'm calling from the corner store downstairs. Dan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who else to call. Dan stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. Stay in the store. Do not go anywhere. His panic was palpable. I'm coming. He hung up and immediately reached for his jacket on the hanger. Nancy, Lexi has an emergency. I have to go, he said, throwing the jacket over his shoulders. I leaned against the headboard watching him. It's pouring out there. I know. And I have a fever. His movements paused. He walked back to the bed, reaching out to stroke my cheek. You took the medicine. Just sleep, okay? You'll feel better in the morning. She's standing outside in a towel. Nancy, if I don't go, something terrible could happen. His voice carried the weight of a soldier heading to the front lines. Wait for me. I'll be back as soon as I can. With that, he turned and strode out of the bedroom. The front door clicked shut. I looked at the mug of ginger tea, still radiating heat on the nightstand. Then I looked at the empty space where he had just stood. The crimson numbers seemed to bleed into the dim room. 120 days, 8 hours, 15 minutes. Oh, I whispered to the empty room. I'll wait. The morning sun did not break through the storm. It simply turned the sky into a flat, wet sheet of gray, casting a cold, shadowless light across our bedroom floor. The steam from my ginger tea had long since dried, leaving a dark, sticky ring on the white laminate of the nightstand. My fever had broken around 3 a.m., leaving my skin cool, damp, and smelling faintly of the menthol ointment Dan had rubbed onto my temples before he left. I stood by the window, watching the rain run down the double-pane glass. Below, in the gravel driveway of our apartment building, his black SUV pulled into its designated space. The engine cut, and after a long, silent minute, the driver's side door opened. Dan stepped out. His hair was messy, sticking to his forehead in damp, dark clumps. His wool coat was thrown over his shoulder, and his white linen shirt was wrinkled at the collar, carrying the distinct, sweet scent of cheap citrus shampoo, the kind the budget motel near the highway stocked in bulk. I didn't run down the stairs to meet him. I didn't hide his slippers or put the coffee on. I simply stood by the window and watched him walk up the stone steps of the entryway. The door to our apartment opened with a soft, clinical click. Nancy. His voice was quiet, hoarse with exhaustion, carrying that familiar, gentle concern that had always made my heart melt. He walked into the bedroom, his eyes wide and dark as he scanned my face. "You're up," he said, stepping closer to press the back of his hand to my forehead. His palm was warm, but it felt like dead leather against my skin. "Your fever is down. Thank God. I was so worried about you all night." "The locksmith took a long time?" I asked, my voice carrying the flat, level rhythm of a dry logistics report. "The locksmith?" Dan paused, his hand hovering in the air for a fraction of a second before he dropped it back to his side. "Oh, yeah. He didn't arrive until 4. And Lexi was in a terrible state, Nancy. She was shivering so hard she couldn't even hold her coffee cup. I couldn't just leave her in that damp hallway alone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb sliding across the screen to show me his messaging history with the locksmith, a clean, chronological proof of his benevolence. "I stayed on her sofa until the lock was secured," he said, his voice entirely sincere. "I wanted to make sure she was safe." I looked up at his head. The red numbers were glowing, a sharp, bleeding crimson against the gray light of the window. 98 days, 14 hours, 22 minutes. The 7 hours he had spent in her apartment overnight had cost us exactly 99 days. "I understand, Dan," I said, my voice quiet as the rain outside. "You did the right thing. She's your employee." "I'm glad you see it that way, babe," he said, a soft, relieved smile finally breaking through his fatigue. He reached out to pinch my cheek, a playful, familiar gesture he had used since our college years, but I quietly stepped back, pretending to reach for my empty tea mug. "Go take a shower, Dan," I said, not looking at him. "You smell like her shampoo." By the end of the month, the countdown was down to 50 days. I spent my afternoons in the quiet sanctuary of the city library, my laptop open on the long oak table, my fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard as I finalized the asset separation files with my attorney, Robert. "He signed the joint account deeds 7 years ago, Nancy," Robert said over the phone, his voice carrying the dry, level authority of a court registrar. "But because the capital for your logistics firm came from your mother's estate, he has no legal claim to the property on the east side. We can have the foreclosure notice served to his office by Monday morning." "Keep it quiet, Robert," I said. "I don't want him to see the filing until the clock hits 0. "Why?" Robert asked, his tone curious. "If you know he's going to leave, why not just file now? You have the evidence of his credit card statements. He spent $4,000 on a designer leather bag for her last week." "Because," I said, looking out the arched window at the gray winter sky, "I want him to have the perfect exit. I want him to believe he was the one who made the choice, so he can never say I was the one who ruined his future." I hung up, packed my things into my leather tote bag, and drove to the office of the Jefferson Group. I was there to drop off the quarterly tax returns, a task I had handled for his firm since we got married. The floor of the executive suite was quiet, the secretaries speaking in low, tiptoeing whispers that made the office feel like a cathedral. I walked toward Dan's private office. The glass wall was half open, and inside, Lexi was sitting at the low table near his desk. She was wearing my gray cashmere cardigan, the one I had passed back to her in the car during the storm, the one she had forgotten to return. She was laughing, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes locked onto Dan's face, as he explained a financial spreadsheet on his tablet. "As you can see, Lexi," Dan said, his voice carrying that warm, patient mentor tone he used when he wanted to look like a savior. "The margin in the third quarter is static, but if we adjust our logistics contract..." He stopped. He saw me standing in the doorway, my leather tote bag clutched in my hand. "Nancy," he said, his hand stopping over his tablet. "Hi, Dan," I said, stepping inside. "I brought the tax returns. Serena said they needed your signature by 5. "Oh," Dan said, his brow furrowing slightly as he looked at the blue folder in my hand. "Thanks, babe. I'll sign them now." Lexi didn't stand up. She remained on the sofa, her hand casually playing with the gold leaf button of my cardigan. She looked at me, her lips curving into a soft, sweet smile of triumph. "Hi, Nancy," she purred, her voice carrying that high, slightly breathless quality. "I'm so sorry about the cardigan. I've been meaning to wash it and bring it back to you, but my apartment's washing machine has been acting up again." "Keep it, Lexi," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "The wool is starting to pill anyway. I was planning to throw it out." Lexi's smile stiffened. I looked at Dan's head. The crimson numbers were flickering, dropping from 50 days to 41 days. In a single, silent second. "Is there anything else, Nancy?" Dan asked, his voice carrying a distinct edge of annoyance now, as if my presence were a minor disruption to his mentoring schedule. "No," I said, turning on my heel. "I'll see you at home." The final week of the countdown was a blur of dry, winter fog. Dan was rarely home. His emergencies had become a daily routine. Lexi's car had a flat tire on the freeway. Lexi's landlord was threatening her with an illegal eviction. Lexi had a panic attack before her first client presentation and needed him to sit with her in the cafe. He fended off my silence with expensive gifts. On Wednesday night, he brought home a box of fresh, white lilies, my favorite, and a pair of diamond earrings that must have cost $5,000. "For my beautiful wife," he said, his arms wrapping around my waist from behind. As I stood by the kitchen sink. "I know I've been absent lately, Nancy. The M&A campaign is it's a monster. But once the contract is signed next week, we're going to Hawaii. Just you and me. I promise." I looked at the red numbers glowing in the dark of our kitchen. 3 days, 14 hours, 22 minutes. His verbal promises, his expensive diamonds, his tight hugs, none of it bought us even a single extra second. The clock was a mathematical certainty, an objective ledger that was slowly and systematically grinding our 7 years of marriage into dust. "Thanks, Dan," I said, gently pulling my body out of his grip. "The flowers are beautiful." I went to my room, closed the door and locked it. On Friday afternoon, the day before the clock was set to hit 0, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an email from my bank. "Your personal trust account has been successfully separated from the joint ledger. The primary real estate deed for the East Side townhouse is now registered solely under your name." I closed the browser, put my phone on silent, and sat down on the edge of our master bed. The closet was half empty. I had spent the last 3 days quietly transferring my books, my coats, and my mother's old crystal vases to my new apartment downtown. I had left his things untouched, his suits hanging in a neat, pristine row, his leather shoes polished and aligned on the bottom shelf. The door to our apartment opened with a soft, clinical click. Dan walked in. He didn't have his suit jacket on, and his shirt was wrinkled and stained with coffee near the cuff. He looked exhausted, his hair messy, his eyes wide and vacant as if he were carrying a heavy, silent secret. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his head bowed, his hands resting on his knees. "Nancy," he said, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. "Hi, Dan," I said. "We need to talk," he said, his voice dropping into that quiet, reasonable register he used when he was explaining a difficult business decision to his board. I looked up at his head. The red numbers were flickering, down to the final 30 seconds. 29 seconds. 28 seconds. 27 seconds. "What is it, Dan?" I asked, my voice carrying the flat, level rhythm of a dry laboratory report. The marriage," he said, his hand reaching into his pocket to pull out a thick white envelope. He laid it flat on the nightstand, right next to the dried ring of my ginger tea from 3 months ago. I've been thinking a lot about us, Nancy. We've been together for 7 years. You're a good wife. You've always been so quiet, so independent. 15 seconds, 14 seconds, 13 seconds. "But I'm not in love with you anymore, Nancy," he said, his voice cracking with a raw, desperate relief. Lexi needs me. She's young, she's struggling. And every time I look at her, I feel like I'm actually alive. I don't want to hurt you. I've left the joint account to you and the car." 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Midnight. The red numbers above his head went dead. The crimson light flickered once, turned into a soft, pale gray, and then vanished completely, leaving his head clean and empty under the ceiling lamp. I stood up. I picked up the white envelope from the nightstand, walked over to the kitchen, and laid it flat on the counter. Then, I pulled my own folder from my leather tote bag and laid it beside his. "This is the signed relinquishment form for the joint account, Dan," I said, my voice entirely peaceful. "And the key to the East Side house. I've already moved my things out." Dan stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a sudden absolute terror as he realized I wasn't going to cry, scream, or ask him why. "Nancy," he whispered, his voice shaking. You knew?" "I knew the timeline, Dan," I said, walking toward the door, my heels clicking a slow, steady cadence against the marble floor. And unlike you, I didn't want to miss my dinner. I opened the door, stepped out into the bright, clean winter sun, and let the heavy wood click shut behind me, leaving the perfect husband alone in his grand, empty room. 3 years later, the coastal town of Mendocino was quiet in the winter. The air smelled of salt, pine needles, and the cold mist that rolled off the Pacific every morning. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves against the black cliffs of the harbor. I sat on the wooden deck of my small, gray-shingled cottage, a cup of hot chamomile tea in my hand. My home was small, warm, and entirely peaceful, the floor-to-ceiling glass windows looking out over a garden of wild rosemary and lavender. Beside me on the table lay my drawing tablet, its screen displaying a clean, elegant landscape design for our new municipal park project. Nancy. I looked up. My colleague, a tall, quiet man with dark hair and a green backpack, named Marcus, was standing by the glass door, holding a fresh batch of warm cinnamon rolls. The wind is picking up, Nancy, Marcus smiled, sitting down beside me and pulling a wool blanket over our knees. Are you cold? I looked down at the design on my screen, then at the golden sunset over the ocean and finally at his warm, genuine smile. His head was completely clean. No numbers, no timers, no red light flickering in the dark. No, I said, leaning my head against his shoulder, my fingers closing around the warm ceramic of my teacup. I'm very warm. Across the water, the first yellow lights of the harbor were starting to glow in the dark, but I didn't look at them. I closed my eyes, took a sip of my warm tea, and let the clean, cold wind off the ocean carry the last dry leaves of the past away into the endlessly beautiful horizon ahead.